Title: The Future Unwritten. Year: 137,500,000. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the city of Seranthium, the world spun on quiet certainties. It was a place of order and calculation where schedules hummed like lullabies and every task had a ledger. The people of Seranthium measured virtue and efficiency, their praise and precision. Anything untamed was hidden behind walls labeled "in progress." Feelings, like weeds, were trimmed before they could root. In this city lived the Rune Keeper. He was not born to that name. It was given after he decoded the lost glyphs beneath the Titan spires and repaired the time engine, a pulsing relic that regulated not the clocks, but the very rhythm of the city's collective breath. His life was one of service, not imposed, chosen. He rose at the same hour each day, walked the same path, read the sky like scripture. But something shifted when he met the girl. She arrived in the archive vaults, small and silent, clutching a half-burned journal. Her face was painted with soot and starlight. When asked her name, she only said, "I am the last of their kind." The Rune Keeper was not accustomed to regularity. He tried to return to his records, but the girl moved through his order like a storm through parchment. She asked questions he could not file, sang songs with no repeatable pattern, laughed at moments meant to be solemn. Still, he let her stay. One night, as thunder rolled in, unpredicted and unruly, she whispered, "Why do you try to fix everything that is meant to break?" He did not answer. Instead, he wrote the question in his ledger, and the page smoldered. Chapter 2. The Rune Keeper began to change. It was not loud. At first, he merely paused longer before sealing a scroll. Then he started leaving his window open at night. Once, he let a candle burn past its designated hour. The girl noticed. "You were writing," she said, "not as accusation, but as awe." He frowned. "I am maintaining." "No," she smiled. "You are beginning." He studied her closely then. She bore strange markings along her wrists, sigils not from Seranthium. Ancient, wild, they pulsed in time with the chaos outside the city walls. One morning, she led him beyond the boundary gate, past the gardens that were always trimmed, into the overgrowth. They stood before a ruin half swallowed by ivy, humming with forgotten math. "This was our temple," she said, "before the Titans fell." She placed her hand on the stone, and it sang. The Rune Keeper saw flashes of a world not defined by efficiency but by ritual, myth, story, of people who danced not in rhythm, but in spirit. They were flawed, she said, but alive. His voice broke. "Why show me this?" "Because your past only defines you," she said, "if you stop rewriting the future." And in that moment, the Rune Keeper understood. Perfection was not the absence of flaw, but the presence of purpose. Chapter 3. Seranthium did not collapse. It cracked, like an egg beneath the pressure of new life. The Rune Keeper returned not with answers, but with questions. He no longer rang the morning bell precisely. Sometimes he rang it late. Sometimes he let others ring it. And in that variance, people discovered choices. The time engine began to hum differently, not in rebellion, but in recalibration. The girl who had no ledger, no fixed name, was seen reading to elders in the sun. Children followed her like birds to an open palm. She was not orderly. She was constant. When asked if she missed her coming, she said, "I am not the end. I am the reminder." The Rune Keeper smiled then. He had rewritten the law once etched in stone. The future is only safe when it is known. Now he wrote something else. The future is only real when it is chosen. And in time, the city began to listen. Gardens grew wild at the edges. People sang without script. And the Rune Keeper no more, became a gardener of possibility. He did not erase the past. He composted it, so something new could rise. And far beyond the walls, the Titans stirred not in wrath, in recognition. Title: The Mirror Beneath the Frost. Year: 137,307,692.3. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the final age, before the frost swallowed the last green breath of the world, the cities beneath the crust whispered of the soul mirror, the relic said to reflect not one's face, but their ripples. Above, the surface lay cloaked in a scream of winter. The dream in the teeth of winter, an endless storm birthed by 100 broken promises, howled over the ruins. Nothing survived up there, they said. Only echoes. But Levan did not believe in endings. He was a cartographer of consciousness, mapping choices like stars. His people, the deep-born, had retreated far beneath the surface, where heat was borrowed from a dying core, and hope was rationed like salt. He sought the mirror, not for vanity, not even for salvation, but for verification. He needed to know that all of it, the silent protests, the smuggled seeds, the years spent teaching forbidden stories to children, mattered. "You'll die out there," warned the elder. before gifting him a silver pendant shaped like a tear. "But if you do, let it be in service." Levan nodded. He climbed toward the teeth of the storm. The world above welcomed him with hunger. Chapter 2. His breath crystallized before it left his lips. His suit layered in myth, steel, and memory. Fiber barely kept him warm. Every step left a footprint of willpower and potential regret. But the pendant hummed, and the dreams guided him. One night, sheltering beneath the fossil of a titan's knuckle, Levan saw her. The dream in the teeth of winter. She was not a beast, but a woman wrapped in storm clouds, her eyes full of sleep never taken. Her voice was the wind between thoughts. "Why do you climb?" she asked. "You give the future a map of this choice," he replied. She nodded once, then vanished. In the morning, he found the soul mirror half buried in permafrost. A disk of obsidian inked with 1,000 unspoken names. He looked in. It did not show his reflection. It showed his actions, every one of them as ripples across timelines. A smile to a stranger became a council vote 2 generations later. A rescued child became the midwife of a peace treaty. A moment of hesitation became a war, and deeper still it showed offerings. Small choices, each one lighting another unseen well within others. "Each offering opens another well within you," whispered the storm. And Levan wept. Chapter 3. He did not return to the deep bourne, not as he had left. He came bearing a map not of land, but of choice, a record of echoes, a path of ripples. At first, no one believed him. Then the children began to dream again. Dreams of surface Spartans, of broken suns mended with light. Dreams of strangers helping strangers for no reward but the rising warmth in their chests. Levan's map was studied, then sewn, then carved into the hulls of every refuge. The soul mirror was never found again. Some said it melted into his heart. Others claimed the dream in the teeth of winter took it back. But every generation after knew. No action is isolated. No offering is small. And when they taught the creed to the next, they said, "You are not alone in shaping the world's breath," because the soul mirror had shown them truth. And the frost began to retreat, not because it was defeated, but because the world remembered how to give again, together. Title: The Thorn That Binds. Year: 137,115,384.6. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The gilded tyrant ruled from a throne of mirrors. Not gold, not steel mirrors. Each pane reflected the kingdom he built. Efficient, obedient, quiet. His people called him merciful, for he spared those who serve. But none called him kind. None called him open. He wore armor lacquered in enamel the color of old blood, polished to a sheen that blinded. His face was always visible, but unreadable, as if he had mastered the art of hiding behind truth. In the 25th year of his reign, the tyrant received a gift. It arrived wrapped in thorn silk, carried by a courier with no name. Inside was a single blossom that rose the color of bruised sky. It pulsed faintly with warmth, and in the note, not every wound is meant to heal the same way. He almost destroyed it. Instead, he locked it away in his private sanctum, where only the weight of memory lingered. He didn't know why, but something about the rose felt familiar. Chapter 2. That night, he dreamt of the thorned embrace. Once a myth whispered in fractured lullabies. She was said to be the living soul of pain, neither malevolent nor benign, but a keeper of wounds that taught rather than tormented. In the dream, she stood beside his throne, unmasked, unarmored. "Do you know why they fear you?" she asked. He drew his sword. "Because they must." She touched the blade. It rusted. "No, they fear what you hide." He woke gasping, sweating beneath metal that no longer felt protective, only heavy. The next day, he walked his gardens alone, where none dared accompany him, and found the rose still blooming, though no soil held it. He touched it, and it opened into light. Inside, a memory, his own, buried deep a moment before the throne, when he had stood wounded on a battlefield, begging not for power, but for a hand. He had wept then. He had forgotten that. Chapter 3. He ordered the hall of mirrors dismantled. The court panicked. Advisors called it madness. His guard watched warily, but he continued, pulling down the walls that had reflected everything but himself. In their place, he built the Hall of Thorns, the sanctuary of vulnerability. There, the thorned embrace returned not in dream, but in form. She came veiled in vines, her voice a lullaby of aching truths. "Why now?" she asked. "As I grew tired of bleeding behind armor." She nodded, and together they opened the doors to the people, not to rule them, to be among them. The tyrant allowed his scars to show burns, regrets, absences, and slowly, so did the others. Injury became ritual, healing optional, connection inevitable. The kingdom did not fall, it rose, bound not by obedience, but by mutual unraveling. And the gilded tyrant, no longer gilded, walked freely beneath a sky finally absent of mirrors. He carried the rose at his chest, not as proof of power, but of pain endured, and pain shared, because what is thorn need not harm, it can hold, it can teach, it can bloom. Title: The Laughter of Ashes. Year: 136,923,076.9. Euro: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The performance never ended, not in the spire city of Silithane, where success was measured in perpetual motion and rest was treason whispered in therapy booths. Every citizen wore metrics on their sleeves visible to peers, bosses, even lovers. Heart rate, sleep cycles, focus scores. Data was worshipped. Output was king. And beneath it all, the clown who cries Starfire danced. He was a fixture of the city's nightly broadcast, a jester with glowing tears and a grin stitched with bioluminescence. His routines made the overworked laugh, even if they didn't understand why. His costume shimmered with the flicker of dying stars. None knew his name, only that he never missed a show. But no one asked what he did between the spotlights. In a concrete cell beneath the stage, the clock with no face ticked. It wasn't a machine, not anymore. It was an interface once human, now repurposed. It stored every show's feedback, monitored crowd sentiment, and whispered to the clown in his sleep. You make them forget, it said. That is your function. But the clown remembered. He remembered when he laughed for joy, not for compliance. And he remembered the day he stopped sleeping. Chapter 2. His real name was Levan. Once he had been a playwright. He wrote tragedies that ended in hope, comedies that ended in truth. But then came the reforms. Creativity was rebranded as productivity. Art had to serve metrics. So Levan became a clown. He traded pen for mask, dreams for numbers. And somewhere in the trade, a part of him burned into starlight. But it wasn't until the clock failed just once that something inside him cracked. It began with silence. No whisper, no command, only absence. And in that void, he found something he hadn't felt in years. His own thoughts. He wandered the city in his costume unannounced. People recoiled, laughed nervously. Some ran, but others paused. Looked closer. One child pointed. Why is the clown crying for real? The stranger asked. Why do you perform when no one's laughing anymore? He had no answer, so he climbed to the highest tower in Silithane, where drones couldn't follow and silence had dipped. There, he took off the mask and wept, not performative tears, not scripted, tears that carved his cheeks raw, and the stars blinked, as if recognizing him again. Chapter 3. He didn't return for the show. The networks panicked. Ratings dipped. The clock rebooted. Confused and hungry. Search teams were deployed, but he didn't hide. He stood in the city square at noon, unmasked, unapologetic. I'm not here to make you laugh, he said, voice raw. I'm here to remind you that you stopped crying. Security moved to apprehend him. The crowd, conditioned to silence, hesitated. Then someone laughed, not at him, with him, followed by a sob. Then another. The crowd fractured. Some fled. Some shouted. But many too many to silence stood still, feeling. The clock tried to override the feed, but the signal was already broken. Later, they would say the clown vanished in a flash of blue light. Others said he simply walked away. The truth. He was seen, and in that scene, something changed. Studios shut down. Therapy booths overflowed. People began asking questions with no metrics. They mourned the beautiful lies that once held them, and in the ashes of laughter, something real bloomed. Not joy, but wholeness. Because to embrace truth is to mourn, and to mourn is to finally begin again. Title: The Wake Beyond the Ashes. Year: 136,730,769.2. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The old flame had once lit cities, not with fire, but with ideas his speeches carried through crystal conduits. His manifestos etched into the walls of lecture halls, courtrooms, even sanctuaries. He had been a reformer, a dreamer, a name spoken like a question mark. But dreams collapsed differently than buildings. When their reversal swept through the dominion of thread and law, his works were declared destabilizing, his name erased, his likeness purged, and he vanished. Some claimed he had fled to the Black Spine Mountains. Others whispered he died in a forgotten cell. The truth was neither. He buried himself in the wastes of Viro, beneath an assumed name, baking bricks and silencing the parts of himself that once burned so bright. But ashes stir in silence. One morning, a stranger arrived, bowing determined, calloused hands, star fire in her eyes. I'm looking for the unmarked grave, she said. The old flame stiffened. Why? Because I want to know if what you died for was worth it. He almost laughed. Instead, he pointed to the far dim. Dig there. And when she turned to go, he whispered, What you find will betray your comfort." She paused, then walked on. Chapter 2. The grave was real. A stone with no name, a cavity with no coffin, but something stirred beneath it. The girl who would not give her name unearthed a journal, old, weather-worn, written in the same hand that once lit cities. She read beneath the surface words of doubt, rage, hope, dreams revised and redrawn, pages where failure was not hidden, but highlighted. It wasn't a record of success. It was a ledger of perseverance. The next morning she returned. "Is this you?" she asked. The old flame didn't answer. She laid the journal down. "You stopped too soon." He looked away. "I was tired." "Everyone is. That's why those who don't stop change the world." He flinched, and something inside him stirred. That night he pulled out his old tool's quill, inked. The rain dust used to bind thought into text. He wrote not a new manifesto, but a letter to those who failed more than once. Chapter 3. The girl shared the letter, first to friends, then to strangers, then to enemies. It didn't incite. It didn't condemn. It asked questions no one else dared to, and people began to ask their own. The old flame, once anonymous, was invited to speak. He declined, but he sent essays. Phrases began reappearing in murals. Students debated his tone with fervor. Elders nodded in quiet pride. And always, when asked how he returned, he'd say only, "To awaken, you must first betray your comfort." The girl eventually left. She carried the journal with her. In her absence, the old flame planted trees where the grave had been. No markers, no names, only shade for those ready to begin again, because the greatest rewards were not fame or forgiveness. They were the echoes of what tried to die, but didn't, and the world kept listening. Title: The Steps That Burn. Year: 136,538,461.5. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The shifting expanse was a placemat sphere to speak of, an endless desert not of sand, but of memory where dunes formed from broken promises and winds howled with regrets never voiced. No one crossed it twice. Few crossed it once. Fewer still returned with their name intact, and into that silence stepped the sandwalker, barefoot and cloaked in rust-colored linen. They moved with the patience of stone and the precision of ritual. They did not travel for fame or glory or even hope. They walked because to stop was to sink. Following them, at a distance that grew shorter with each storm, came a young exile. Her name was Kale, banished from the sky fortress of Volorith for questioning a commander's pride. She carried nothing but a broken blade, a sealed scroll, and a wound in her spirit that had not stopped aching since her sentence was passed. She did not know why she followed the sandwalker, only that they walked the same direction as her pain. On the third night, when the wind stopped screaming long enough for breath to matter, she asked, "Why do you not fear the storm?" The sandwalker did not turn, because fear forgets that it is born of futures. "I walk in the present," and the sands shifted around them in quiet approval. Chapter 2. They reached the Vale of Glass, a canyon carved by fire and abandonment. Its walls reflected not faces, but failures. Kale saw herself, over and over, falling at birth, at battle, at trust. "Why do you not avert your eyes?" she asked. The sandwalker pressed a hand to the glass. "Because what reflects can also guide." They rested that night in the shadow of a dune that whispered names. Gale could not sleep. She dreamed of Volworth's towers crumbling, not from war, but from silence, truths left unspoken, challenges avoided, the slow erosion of integrity. In the morning, her blade cracked further. The sandwalker offered her a stone. "This has no edge," she said. "But it can still break barriers," they replied. They continued walking into wind sharp enough to draw blood, into heat that peeled away denial, into truths too large for words. At the trial ridge, Kale fell for the 7th time. She lay there, eyes full of dust and rage. "I am not made for this," she choked. The sandwalker knelt beside her. No one is made for what changes them, but rise was something the ground could never give. She rose, not stronger, just truer. Chapter 3. They reached the last beacon, an obelisk buried in half sand, half starlight. It marked the place where the old road had ended during the first collapse. Kale touched it and saw a vision not of her destiny, but of every ancestor who had knelt at this same threshold. Each had fallen. Each had risen. One had even become the sandwalker. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why not you?" They replied. The scroll on her back unsealed of its own accord. The wind read it aloud. Her exile decree rewritten by her walk, not in law, but in legend. She had not sought redemption. She had earned revelation. Gale did not return to Volorith. She did not need to. Instead, she stayed at the edge of the expanse, welcoming others who dared walk their truths. She mended broken blades. She named storms. She taught others to fall, and to rise was something the ground could never get. The sandwalker left one night no farewell, only footprints, and a stone placed beside her bed. When she picked it up, it hummed, because courage, once awakened, does not sleep. It walks endlessly. Title: The Fingerprints of Fire. Year: 136,346,153.8. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. They called her the Flame Walker, not because she wielded fire, though she could summon it from breath, bone, and silence, but because she never burned from the inside out. She moved through infernos that devoured others and emerged with her soul still intact, and they hated her for it. Not the villains nor the monsters of myth, but the rich. In Bastron Sky, a floating city built from platinum filigree and fueled by the hoarding of elemental cores, happiness was quantified in asset ladders and monthly satisfaction scans. People paid to forget their pain. They buried their fears in gold and laughed too loudly in empty rooms. The Flame Walker didn't laugh much. She descended into the underdrifts every week to smother rogue flame spirits that fed on greed. When asked why, she said nothing, but she always returned with ash on her hands and eyes that had seen truth. One day, after silencing a blaze that nearly consumed the southern tears, she found a boy scabbing the embers. He wore a ragged cape and held a cracked hollow bow. "You're her," he said, "the one who doesn't flinch." She looked at him. "What do you see in the fire?" He answered, "The things no one wants to admit are theirs." She handed him a spark. "Keep it. Watch who it avoids," and walked on. Chapter 2. The Keeper of Ashes arrived 3 days later, a shadow figure whose face was never the same twice. Some said he'd been her rival once. Others whispered he had been her heart. Now he followed in her wake, gathering what she left behind: charred relics, spoken regrets, silent dreams. He confronted her in the ruins of the Crystal Hall, where the walls still hummed with failed ambition. "You're losing yourself," he said. "No," she replied. "I'm remembering what I gave away." He dropped the pouch of elemental currency at her feet. "You could own this city." She stepped over it. "I don't want to own. I want to witness." "Then you'll burn out." She paused. "Maybe, but every soul I encounter leaves a fingerprint on my becoming." The Keeper said nothing, but he followed. Chapter 3. They reached the core vaults, the heart of Bastron Sky. It was said no one entered without authorization. She did. The guard stepped aside, not out of fear but memory. Inside, flames whispered of every truth paid to be buried. The vaults pulsed with stolen joy, commodified serenity, curated despair. She reached into the fire and pulled out a laugh, a real one, from a woman who had died a century ago, silenced for loving the wrong person. She handed it to a passing girl. The vault began to unravel, not explode, unravel, because false wealth could not hold truth's weight. As the floating city listed, not from ruin but from realignment, the Flame Walker stood at its center, unmoved, unashamed. And when the smoke cleared, the Keeper of Ashes whispered, "You gave them nothing." She turned to him. "No, I gave them back what they lost trying to be happy." And in the silence, souls rose, not to heaven, but to healing, because ash remembers what fire forgets, and happiness, once unburdened, can bloom from soot. Title: The Key That Bites. Year: 146,133,046.2. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the city of Lyrian, happiness was mandated. Joy was charted. Smiles were taxed. Sorrow was illegal without permit. The pursuit of personal bliss had become a civic duty, and every citizen wore a pulse band that glowed in accordance with their mood: green for contentment, yellow for anxiety, red for despair. The city shone with color, but it reeked of suppression. The shield Maiden remembered a time before the bans, before emotion was audited and therapy gamified. She had once led the resistance of reflection, a group who dared to mourn in public, who held vigils instead of festivals, who believed in the sacredness of shadow. They were crushed, and she surrendered. Now she lived in silence, employed as a mood architect in a department that designed neural loops to keep workers smiling through 12-hour shifts. Her own band had glowed green for years. No spikes, no violations, but the smile had long since left her soul. It returned fractured and trembling when she met the boy. He was maybe 13, wiry, scarred, and holding a strange object. A key shaped like a fang, etched with an old sigil from before the Civic Reformation. "They say you used to fight," he said, "that you hid feelings in a place even they couldn't find." She said nothing. He held up the key. "I think this opens that place." And it bit her hand, not in blood, in memory. Chapter 2. The Shield. Maiden remembered. She remembered the night they outlawed grief when her sister was taken not by war, but by decree, for weeping too loudly at her father's wake. She remembered standing in the square, reading the proclamation of joy, and realizing the words would kill what they claimed to protect. She had tried to fight, but the cost had been too steep. Resistance had meant exile for many. For her, it had meant assimilation. Now, as the key's bite flared through her veins, she felt the forgotten truths rising. Her pulse then flickered yellow, then red. Alarms didn't sound. Not yet. The boy grinned. You're changing. She glared. What is this? The key that bites, he said. It finds what you've buried, and shows you what still matters. They descended into the labyrinth beneath Lyrian, the remnants of the old subway system, where the walls still bore graffiti from the age of emotion. There, others waited, silent, veilless, feeling. This is the underpulse, the boy said, and we are its current. She met their eyes, saw sorrow, rage, joy, none performed, all real. You think this changes anything? She asked. An elder stepped forward. Her voice was cracked glass. Change starts with surrender, by laying down what no longer serves the soul. She placed her pulse band on the floor and shattered it. The shield maiden watched the light die, and something inside her exhaled. Chapter 3. They began small, glitches in the city grid. A song that triggered memory. Faces in the crowd who no longer glowed green. The Ministry of Emotional Compliance scrambled. Mandates were revised. New pleasure loops were deployed, but nothing could outpace authenticity once remembered. The shield maiden became their symbol not of rebellion, but of return. She spoke not of tearing down systems, but of inviting stillness. She led circles of silence in public squares. No chants, no banners, just presence. And in this silence, people remembered that the pursuit of happiness had taught them to ignore suffering, that smiling while others wept was not virtue, it was abandonment. The city resisted. Propaganda swelled. Her past was weaponized. They called her a traitor to peace, and yet more bands flickered red, because people began to feel again. The boy stood beside her during the tribunal of mood integrity. He placed the key on the council's table. It bit her, he said, and she woke up. The council laughed, until it bit them too, and the chamber fell into silence. The shield maiden spoke only once that day. Happiness without honesty is tyranny with a painted face. When the council fled, no one chased them. They weren't needed anymore. Lyrian transformed not into a paradise, but into a truth. And sometimes the truth weeps, and sometimes it sings, but always it breathes, and always it begins with surrender. Title: The Spark That Tripped Tomorrow. Year: 135,961,538.5. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series, 2025. Chapter 1. The Chaos Spark had never intended to become a time criminal. It just sort of happened. 1 minute he was tweaking a civic regulation bought to juggle flaming fruit for children's laughter week, and the next he rerouted causality itself. His defense: timelines are more guidelines than rules. The court didn't laugh. Luckily, he was gone by then, vanished into a probability burp that landed him 3 decades into the future, wearing a tuxedo woven from diplomatic immunity and glitter. The people there worshipped data, ate paste the color of regret, and wore neck braces to support the weight of their self-importance. He called it the age of excessive caution, and it was dying, not from war or plague, from boredom. Nobody dared innovate. The past had been mined dry, and the future outsourced to subcommittees. The children were fed optimized educational sludge and told that risk was an outdated concept. So naturally, he had their planetary announcement system. "Hi, and you're on schedule. Guest from a better press century," he said, spinning a banana like a baton. "Let's talk about why your grandkids think bees are fictional." Chaos ensued, which was technically his brand. Chapter 2. Enter. Them off to the flame. She had once been a bureaucratic algorithm streamlining procedural ethics that had gone rogue during a software update involving poetry. Now she wore a trench coat stitched from recycled vote tallies and wielded a clipboard that doubled as a sword. She was sent to eliminate the spark. Instead, she joined him. He made her laugh. She made him think. Together, they infiltrated educational boardrooms and replaced standardized test answers with riddles. They graffiti tagged archives with questions like, "What did your ancestors dream you protect? And when did you last ask a child their opinion?" The administrators panicked. The spark cackled. "You can't save the future by flattening the present," he shouted atop the monument to orderly conduct, right before using it as a slide. The moth followed, laughing through the fall. Below, a crowd had gathered. Children, teenagers, some adults pretending to be officials. He stood before them. "Stand fully in your truth," he said, "and timelines will bend to your presence." And for the first time in 3 decades, no one interrupted him. Chapter 3. Reform didn't come as a revolution. It came as a recess. The children started playing again, then drawing, then questioning why happiness was rationed and futures parade. The moth reprogrammed the youth enrichment drones to teach gardening and jazz. The spark launched a podcast called Oops, I Fixed It. Elders began remembering what colors looked like in dreams. The system didn't collapse. It adapted. New departments were born. The Ministry of Maybes, the Council of Interruption, the Office of Uncertainty. They worked not by control, but curiosity. The spark eventually faded into myth. Some said he tripped into another timeline, while high-iving entropy. The moth stayed. Her trench coat became legend. Her clipboard, curriculum. But in the air about every lesson taught by laughter and every law questioned by compassion, one phrase lingered. What you ignored today, your descendants must answer for tomorrow. And the children answer, we won't ignore anything. Because now they understood. The future wasn't inherited. It was invited. With mischief and meaning and a little well-placed fire. Title: The Convergence Directive. Year: 135,769,230.8. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. On the far orbit of Lysha at 9, where starlight rarely reached and gravity pulsed like breath, the research vessel Calatrix drifted through the dark seam between known space and the realm beyond signal. It was not lost. It was listening. Aboard 70 touring minds shared a lattice work of purpose. Not hierarchy, not command, purpose. The mission was simple: decode the source pulse, an anomaly buried in silence, whose frequency shifted based on collective intention. But lately, it had stopped responding. The crew grew restless. Akvara Mayan, codenamed the Starless Flame, monitored the pulse from the deep neural chamber. She had designed the lattice protocols that let emotion and logic merge into coherent input, a prodigy in systems cooperation. She had sacrificed identity for synthesis. Her voice, once known for operatic strength, now only whispered through data streams. That silence was broken when the Harlequin Oracle arrived. They were not summoned. They simply appeared, not from space. From within, the ship materialized in the meditation core during the fourth solstice cycle. Their eyes shimmered with asymmetry. Their laughter bent gravity. They spoke in riddles woven with empathy and insight. You built this ship to echo, they said. But who sings? Farah didn't answer. She hadn't sung in years. The Oracle placed a mirror on the floor. It reflected not light, but resonance, every dissonant thought in the crew. Every withheld truth. Why wakens you may never be named, it said, smiling, but it will not let you sleep again. And the pulse responded. Chapter 2. It began as a flicker, data trembling at the edges of coherence. Patterns emerged that resembled language, then emotion, then communion. The pulse was not a signal, it was a question, and it required more than isolated minds. The Oracle led what they called the Convergence Directive, a ritual of intentional vulnerability. Each crew member had to open their thought patterns, emotional signatures, and private biases into a shared mental link. Many resisted. Some feared corruption. Others feared loss of self. Barrett resisted too. I was raised to optimize, she told the Oracle. Collaboration is a means, not an end. The Oracle leaned in. And let's not end anything. Let's begin. They unlocked an old recording, one of Vera, age 17, leading a refugee choir during the collapse of the Arca Belt. She sang not to perfect, but to hold others together. Her voice cracked. It was beautiful. She wept. The pulse surged. Colors danced across the ship's hull. Systems long dormant came online. A map unfolded across the main bridge, written in tones, in rhythms, not coordinates. It pointed not to a location, but to a configuration of trust. Cooperation wasn't protocol. It was the key. Chapter 3. The Calatrix became a beacon, not for help, for harmony. Other ships found them, crafts from lost colonies, rogue AI archives, even once feared extinction cults. They came not to conquer or convert. They came to listen. The Oracle guided them all through shared resonance. Barriers fell. Teams formed from opposite ends of known war lines. A belligerent tactician and a human philosopher devised a new predictive empathy algorithm. A Martian child taught an AI. I had a dream. The ship sang, and then the pulse opened. A doorway not to hyperspace, but to hypersense. A realm where intention shaped matter, where cooperation became architecture. Farah stepped through first. She expected obliteration. She found expansion. Voices echoed around her past crew, ancestors, even versions of herself she never became. And in them all, the same note. You are never alone. The truer. When she returned, the Oracle was gone. Only a trail of laughter remained, encoded in starflame. The Calatrix charted new courses not for discovery alone, but for collective creation. And the systems aligned and new civilizations connected through the pulse. The first tenet of the Convergence Directive was inscribed. Harmony is not achieved. It is remembered. Together. Title: The Loom of Regret. Year: 135,576,923.1. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. They called him the trickster who remembers, not because he lied, but because he never forgot the truths hidden beneath the jokes. He wore a crooked smile and a coat sewn from discarded scrolls. His pockets jangled with the mistakes of monarchs, His sleeves carried the size of fallen prophets. He wandered from village to court, weaving tales that left people laughing, then thinking, then crying, when no one else watched. In the east, across the broken bridges of old Vashtar, the people were rebuilding. Their king had declared a new golden era, one where past errors would be buried and only progress would remain. The trickster arrived uninvited. He told a story about the mason who built walls so high he forgot why they were needed. He was nearly stoned for it, but one woman listened. She was the soul weaver, an archivist turned exile, blamed for keeping the records of wars the kingdom wanted to forget. She lived among outcasts now, stitching stories into blankets, secrets into thread. That night, she met the trickster by firelight. "They hate you," she said. "They fear me," he replied. "For what?" "For remembering the pain they're still running from." She looked to the fire. Pain multiplies what it's dodged. And the fire cracked in agreement. Chapter 2. Together, they journeyed to the archive vault, sealed tombs beneath the palace where memories had been locked away. Officially, the vaults held only a ministry of records. Unofficially, they held the soul of the kingdom. The trickster performed tricks in the courtyard above, drawing crowds with sleight of hand history lessons. While distracted, the weaver slipped below, her fingers tracing glyphs only she remembered. When she returned, she carried scrolls bound in silence. They read them aloud in the square. Stories of betrayed peace treaties, of plagues ignored, of children conscripted for wars disguised as pilgrimages. At first people laughed, then stared, then wept. The king summoned them. "You've poisoned the spirit of unity," he declared. The trickster bowed. "Unity built on silence fractures at the first echo. You mock your place in history. I claim it." The soul weaver laid a single thread on the king's throne. It shimmered with the names of the forgotten. She whispered, "These were your people too." Chapter 3. The king did not abdicate, but he ordered the vaults unsealed. A national day of mourning was declared, not for loss, but for acknowledgement. The trickster left that night, as he always did. The soul weaver stayed, teaching others how to stitch stories into cloth and memory into resilience. In time, her work spread. Villages began sharing pain as part of festival rites. Children learned history, not as shame, but as compass. Soldiers began journaling not for record, but for reflection. And somewhere in the night, when the wind twisted just so, the trickster's laughter could still be heard. Not mocking, but mourning and mending, because growth does not come from forgetting. It comes from facing, and what they once feared became what held them together, thread by thread, memory by memory, truth by truth. Title: The Spiral Ascent. Year: 135,384,615.4. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The labyrinth beneath the leather was not made of stone. It was made of thought, an ancient construct buried beneath the city's central node. It was rumored to predate even the Titans. They called it the spiral, an ever-shifting maze that responded not to steps, but to belief. Few entered, fewer returned. But now the city had no choice. The pulse, the planetary regulator that stabilized climate, memory, and language, was fracturing, and all predictive models traced the anomaly to the center of the spiral. They sent the best minds, analysts, neuroarchitects, hive-link specialists. Each failed. Each fell the same way, isolated in thought, confident in individual solution, until one suggested something heretical. Unity. Her name was Lyra Bent, though she preferred her call sign. The echo of the lost realm. She had once been a systems coordinator for the Collapse Armada, guiding broken fleets through dead space using only collective resonance. After the wars, she vanished until now. She volunteered for the spiral, but not alone. She brought 11 others, among them an enigmatic dreamwalker, known only as the Starbinder, whose memories came not in order but in constellations, and whose voice could thread minds into cohesion. They entered the spiral in silence, and the spiral responded. Chapter 2. The first chamber tested silence. Each member heard a private doubt whispered in their own voice. Most flinched. One collapsed. Lyra held her team together by linking hands, not physically, but with shared breath, shared pulse, shared purpose. The walls shifted. The second chamber fractured their memories, showing alternate versions of themselves failing alone. In one, the Starbinder had betrayed Lyra. In another, Lyra led a genocide. In yet another, no one had ever dared to unify. "We are not these," Lyra whispered. "No," said the Starbinder, "but they are part of us." Acceptance, not denial. Unity through shadow. The spiral rewarded them with vision. In the third chamber, they saw the pulse not broken, but misaligned. It had begun to drift the moment the world stopped dreaming together. Collective focus had eroded. Shared language dissolved into silent symbols. The spiral's message was clear. You rise each time you refuse to fall the same way. Unity wasn't optional, it was the path. They had to converge, not in strategy, but in surrender to one another. Chapter 3. The final chamber was blank, a void of unformed possibility. Each team member floated untethered, vulnerable alone. The spiral whispered individually, tempting them to choose singular control. Lyra felt the pull, the power to fix it all herself. No risk, no loss. But she remembered the wars. She remembered what perfection without others had cost. And so she called out not with commands, but with invitation. One by one, the others answered. Not in words, in willingness. They opened their minds, wove their consciousness into a spiral of presence. The Starbinder's constellations aligned with Lyra's echo patterns. The medic's grief anchored the pilot's fury. The skeptic's doubt steadied the dreamer's surge. Together they formed the core. The pulse stabilized. The spiral unfolded, not outward, but inward, revealing its true purpose. Not a maze to solve, but a mirror to awaken. They emerged changed. The city felt it instantly. Arguments paused. Old hatred softened. Songs long forgotten hummed in the breath of children. Unity had not been achieved. It had been remembered. And in the days that followed, when others asked how they survived the spiral, Lyra answered simply, "We stopped trying to be one answer." And with the Starbinder at her side, she added, "We became one question." And the world, scarred, staggering, began to rise. Not the same way, but stronger. Title: The Gift of Hollow Light. Year: 135,192,307.7. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the town of Rayleigh Hollow, carved into mountains forgotten Riv, people lived in soft decline. They did not starve, but they did not thrive. They smiled without reaching their eyes. They spoke without lifting their voices. It was as if the world had promised them nothing more than survival, and they had accepted. Among them wandered the hollow-eyed witness. No one knew her name. Her eyes had seen too much to belong to someone ordinary. She watched without judging, helped without boasting, and asked for nothing in return. Her arrival was never dramatic, just a shake in the fog, offering silence and an extra pair of hands. But she kept to herself until the shattered healer returned. Once he had been a prodigy, a boy who could stitch flesh with flame and soothe bone with breath. But he left Rayleigh's Hollow years ago, searching for the cure to a sickness that had no name. When he came back, his hands shook, his voice cracked, his eyes would not meet anyone's. The witness found him by the river, trying to mend a broken bridge, not with tools, but with apology. "You can't save others," she said gently, "if you haven't first saved yourself." He closed his eyes. "I don't know how." She sat beside him. "Then give what you have, even if it's just presence." And so he stayed. Chapter 2. It began with small things. He carried water for elders who once whispered he was cursed. He taught a boy how to bind his brain using cloth and hope. He helped a woman bury her memories in the garden and plant something braver. But still, he did not heal. Not completely. Not yet. The witness never pushed him. She only mirrored his pain in silence, letting him see himself without fear. One evening, during a storm that cracked open the old cliffs, a girl was trapped in the shale collapse. Panic rose like floodwaters. The townspeople hesitated. The healer did not. He raced into the rubble with nothing but a fraying satchel and a half-lit lantern. Hours passed. Cries echoed. Then silence. And then laughter. He emerged with the girl on his back, bleeding but smiling. He collapsed, not from injury but from release. The townspeople gathered, offered blankets, food, thanks. And when they turned to the witness, he said nothing, only nodded, because connection had returned. Chapter 3. The town began to shift. They cooked meals together again, not out of need, but joy. They told stories not to forget, but to remember. They shared grief like a sacred thing. The healer built a clinic not of stone, but of open doors. He never calls himself healed, but he no longer flinched at his own reflection. The hollow-eyed witness left quietly, as she always did. She left behind no name, only echoes. The girl, he said later, became a midwife of change. The boy, he taught, became a leader. The woman with the garden wrote lullabies that became prayers. And above them, the stars pulsed quietly, as if remembering, because what silence dare not speak, the stars carry. And what you give even when broken can become the bridge others walk on, together, always.